and I would like to talk about Rex, and especially how we at our company use Rex in practice, like what features are we relying on most, because there are a lot of features in Rex. And as a short introduction about me, I would like to say that I was always a sysadmin, like for more than 8 years now, which I believe in 2015 means that I'm mostly developing stuff because we are writing a lot of automation code for our infrastructure. You probably heard the term infrastructure as code. That's what we do as well, and Rex helps us with these kind of tasks. And yeah, for me, the story started with the need to manage more than 100 servers at one of my previous companies, and we needed to somehow make that task possible to, for example, roll out something at the same time on all of the servers. And we were looking into a lot of solutions, like you probably heard the kind of big names like Chef or Puppet. You heard about this. It's kind of the same topic. And the problem with that was that we needed to convince all the managers to, okay, we need this, it will make our work more efficient, we need to roll this out, so we had to plan how we roll out, so it was like sounded like a big project, so it went very slow. And then one of my colleagues showed me Rex, it was like 3 or 4 years ago, and we just gave it a try. And within 5 minutes, we had configuration management. So we were like kind of shocked that, wow, this is possible, because how is it doing this magic and stuff like that? And it turned out it just uses SSH to manage remote machines. Like if you already manage Linux or Unix-based systems, chances are high that you already have it in your infrastructure. So we could spare this complex rollout for config management. So that's why I started to use it. And after a while, I got curious about how this works and how it can be so simple compared to the alternatives. So I actually started to learn Perl because of Rex, and I also registered on GitHub because of Rex, because I found the bug. I wanted to fix this and send a pull request, and it got accepted. And I kept on sending code and fixes, so I got invited to be a Rex core developer. So that's my story behind it, and that's my relation to this project. And let's see what it is. We call it a deployment and configuration management software. You can do both. It started as a deployment management solution to replace Capistrano back then, because, for example, like a couple of years ago, Capistrano didn't have parallel deployment support, and the original author needed it, so he just wrote his own. And what you do during deployment is like copying files to the right places, right? And occasionally run some commands. And if you think about configuration management, it's kind of the same. Like if you need to install a package, it's just like putting the right files to the right place. So it all boils down to file management, which is like kind of interesting. So it turned out that the same framework that was already there for deployment can be easily extended into a configuration management system. And that's how it evolved. And right now, we have a lot of pre-built packages for different operating systems. And since it's only Perl, it can also run on Windows. So from Windows, you can manage over SSH Linux machines. There's also hope that it will be possible to manage Windows with it, but we are not really focusing on that right now. And installing it can be as easy as just cpan mrex or cpan rex. If you already using Perl, it's probably much easier for you. And after installation, a lot of built-in modules will already be available for you, like to manage users or packages or services or virtualization or, I don't know, partition hard disks, so from very low level to high level. So basically we can do bare metal provisioning with Rex too. That's what we do at Adjust. And let's see a basic Rex file. And yeah, I have a a related story to this, that I got invited for an interview like a year ago for my current job, and we were just talking about stuff. There were not a formal process back then, and I decided to hijack this interview session about like, why don't you do that with Rex? And we don't know Rex. Glad you asked. I can just show it to you. And it's like I started to show this, like how you do the same with Rex. And the first part of a Rex file is to tell Rex the authentication information for your systems, like how you can log in to a remote machine, right? The very basic case is like give it a user and a password and specify password authentication. But of course, in practice, it's usually like key-based authentication, and it's just that's it. It can reuse the already existing SSH config that you might have on your machines, and it just calls SSH in the background by default. But there can be a case when you need to use sudo, right? You have your normal user, and then you need to get root permissions and then do management with that. It's also possible, but for our examples, I will just stick with password authentication. The next step is the configuration section in a Rex file. Is you also need to describe your infrastructure and what machines do you have, or what groups do you have, right? Where to connect to, and it can be done like this. With group, you give it a name, servers, and it's just a list. And it's just like a syntactic sugar that we use the fat arrow there because it makes it more readable. But this also means that since it's still normal Perl syntax, you can just come up with your own versions of how to describe your groups. Like, for example, if you would need to get the list of servers in a monitoring system, or from a monitoring system, or from a database, you can just do that because it's just a list in the end. Or you can specify them in a different file if you want, but I want to keep things simple for now. We can use for this convenience range operators. If you have like, I don't know, 100 machines, there are chances that you have like, I don't know, backend 1 to 20. And it's like much easier to use a shorter syntax. And for our examples, I will use 2 web machines, web 1 and web 2, and the load balancer. So it's like 3 machines in this setup. And probably the most interesting part in the Rex file is the last one, is the actual tasks, the logic, what you would like to execute. And you can define task with the task keyword. That's the part of the Rex DSL. Give it a name, let's call it uptime. You define on which groups or which hosts it should run by default. And then just add the actual command, like please run the uptime command and say its output. So print it. And hopefully there's the live demo part, which always tricky. Hopefully I can just run it. I have these machines as virtual machines on my laptop, and that's the output. It connected to all 3 machines, and that's the uptime output. And all tasks successful, that's the end. Let's see a bit more complex, like as a next step example. We wanted to upgrade all the packages on all our systems from our central repository. For that, we needed to update the package descriptions, and then actually upgrade all the packages. And it's just 2 commands with Rex. It would be normally 2 commands too, but what Rex does in this case is it connects to a remote host and it tries to figure out what kind of OS is this. Like, is it a Gentoo or Debian or Fedora? And according to that information, it just runs the right command. For example, apt-get update or image -sync. So it can it hides the complexity of a heterogeneous infrastructure, and you can write reusable tasks easily. So that's what Rex does in the background, like tries to abstract the complexity away for you. And I don't want to run this task right now because it would download a lot of stuff. And the next step was when I actually got hired, and we started to migrate to Rex, our previous homebrewed automation solution. And since what we were going to do was infrastructure as code, it made sense to write tests for that. Like for any code, we would write tests, or not any, but like most code. That's what we started to do. We sit down with our colleagues and described what the previous system did, and also what was the expectation, like the expected state of a system after running a task. And we just wrote those tests, and we went on implementing the task until we passed the test, and then we could just deploy it in production and switch off that part of automation from the old system. And let's see how we can write a test. It's like we need to import RexS, of course. We set the box virtualization method to KVM because that's how Rex tests work. It provisions a virtual machine on your development box, tries to run a task on it, and then goes through all the test cases you defined. And it made sense for us to use libvirt or KVM machines. And it's like we give the test a name as a first step. We specify the base image to be used for this new test machine, and how to authenticate against this test machine, and what task we would like to run. And in this example, and also one of the very first tasks we automated was like, okay, let's just set up NTP. That's our usual example with Rex 2, because it's quite simple, yet a lot of interesting tasks are around it. And after we run this task, we expected that the test machine has a package called NTP, right? That was the first test. And it should have a specific file, etc ntp-conf. Also, this file should have a specific content matching this regex there, like the pool NTP org. And also the service should be running. So we started to write this kind of test. And of course, we finished the test. And if we run it right now, we expect that it would fail, right? Because we don't have any code implemented yet. So it will be just like a lot of failures. Yeah, that's what we expect. And the screen is a bit cut off, but it's like a fail at the end. So it's like a clear visual indicator that about the overall status. So after we had the test, we started to implement it. Like we needed to have a setup NTP, a task called setup NTP, run on all of our servers, and at first the logic was empty. And we needed to install, that was the first test failing. We needed to install a package called NTP, which is basically with Rex DSM, it's about ensuring that it's present. So that's what it does. I think it's very readable and simple. Also, we needed to ensure that this service is running, right? And it's not just running right now, but gets started after reboot. That's what this line does. And for the configuration part, we needed to deploy a file. On the remote machine, it should be called etc ntp-conf, and the source of it should be the local files etc ntp-conf. And what we did here is basically the 3 steps that one generally needs to do around any service you run. You need to install it, you need to configure it, and you need to run it. And of course, sometimes you need to just delete it after a while, but it's like kind of exception. But that's how easy it is to describe all these service-related steps. And in the local file, there's this line. That's the interesting line for us. That's the minimal NTP configuration that you can get. And there's the interesting line, like we are testing for this line. That's why I highlighted this. So I just created it. And we also needed to ensure some kind of ownerships and permissions on this file. So we added the owner group and the mode description. Also, if we change the file, we wanted to automatically restart the service, right, to pick up the new configuration. So we used yet another option for the file command in rex, which is the on change. If there's a change, please restart MTP service. And let's try to run this test now, because we implemented our task. It's installing NTP now. I'm using my mobile net connection currently, so I'm not sure if it would be very fast. But we can wait a bit for that. And because it would be nice to see the passing case. But until then, we could see that if it passes, we can just run the task like this, rex setup NTP. Because we run our test case, we passed it, and we can just run the normal task. And it will run against our defined server group, not against the test VM, if we call it in its full form. Yeah, let's just continue until it works in the background. We can check up on it later. Because the next step we wanted to do, or like face the problem, that sometimes we wanted to use a slightly different NTP configuration for different machines. Like the machines on the border should sync to the outside world, and the machines inside the network should sync to this border machine. And or based on a specific host group, you might need to have yet another configuration. Like if you have a production staging testing environment, they might use a slightly different configuration. But it's like, it's all the same file, ntp.conf, with slightly different content. And for that, we needed to find a way how to solve that, right? And one way could be to put this data into your task, like with a lookup table or something like that. If machine name is this, then use this config. But that kind of makes it hard to maintain in the long term. So we started to use templates and also configuration management database for that, which we call just CMDB, which makes it possible to separate data and logic. Which also in the longer term makes it possible to just give the configuration files to maybe non-sysadmins or non-rex task developers inside our organization, because they can just change slightly the config and Rex will just deploy whatever is written there. And let me show you how we can use that. For example, we want to have one more line in this in our previous test case in the ntp.conf file, and so we write a test for that. Let's check if it's okay. Still installing, but it would be like only one failure at this point, right? Because that's the new assumption we want. And the default CMDB works with the YAML files under CMDB path, and it can take macros. So for example, cmdb/hostname.yaml would be applied only to that machine, right? And there can be a default file which applies to every machine. So for my test, I call this machine Ubuntu, so it's cmdb/ubuntu.yaml. I want to define two different NTP servers right now, standard YAML syntax. It will be like a list of servers to be used. And I want to start processing my file as a template, not as an absolute content, right? So it should be post-processed before deployment. And that's how I write our template. which is like contains standard Perl code, right, within this bracket %signs, and it prefixes all line with server and just writes the contents of $NTP server after this and closes the code. So if I put 10 servers in the CMDB for a specific host, that will be 10 lines. If it's only one, then it will be 1 line. And let's see if it finished. Yay, it's OK and passed. It finished now. If you want to see all the tests, I can show it later, or we can run it now. I'm not sure how much time do I have left. But basically, after we made sure that the CMDB configuration worked, we just create the CMDB files for the default case, like please use load balancer as NTP server, and on the load balancer we just sync to the outside world. So basically those are the core features of Rex that we use every day, and also allowed us to easily manage 120-something machines right now. And that's what I wanted to show as an introduction and to start thinking about it. Do you have any questions right now?
How do you implement, or can you use tunneling with SSH and learning?
Tunnels?
Yeah, tunnels.
Yeah, for example, if you need to jump host, right?
Yeah,
okay, so so the question was that can we use SSH tunnels and or jump hosts with Rex? Yes. For example, it can go into your .ssh/config as a proxy command, right? That's one way to do that. But there's also a specific command in the Rex DSL, like set OpenSSH options, and then you can define it inside your Rex file too, if you don't want to set it for your user. So yes, it's possible. And we also use it. Yeah. Yes?
When you have a bunch of servers, how do you know if one failed for a specific reason? There is a way to know that one failed?
Yes.
How do you manage that?
So the question is, how do you recognize if you run a lot of tasks on multiple servers, which one failed, or were there a failure? There's this last line right now, all tasks successful on all hosts. Yeah, I couldn't show the failing case. I can show it later. But if there was a failing task, then there will be error level log. So it's like red and stuff, and sorted by task name and host. So you get the overview that this failed. This is a kind of new feature right now, because previously we just examined the logs, or we just wrote tasks defensively that please stop at this point, or write something to the output, but it gets into Rex core. And it's currently in master branch on GitHub, but not yet released. But it's there. Yes?
When you say it's possible to have Windows clients, is there something done already about it?
What do you mean by Windows plugins?
Windows clients.
Windows clients. Yes. So is it possible to manage Rex, manage Windows machines with Rex, and what's the status, right? That's the question. There was an experimental project within the Rex community to use alternative transport layers instead of SSH. There's an implementation of using HTTP for that, because it's much easier, or was much easier to install and configure a web server on a Windows machine than an SSH server. So that could work, and Rex can work locally on Windows, so that's okay. That was the initial idea, but recently the PowerShell guys at Microsoft are working on getting proper OpenSSH server support, and we are very excited about that and to see how it works. And at that point, I think it would be quite easy to just implement the rest, what is not working yet, because there are like path separator differences and stuff like that. And so probably something will be broken at the first time, but the biggest obstacle will probably soon go away. If you want to test that, you will be very welcome. Okay, then we can try out later. I will be here all day. If you have specific questions, we can just hack on that and stuff like that. I heard that there are some PCs installed with Rex, so we can just sit down and hack later if you want. And yeah, have a nice Perl workshop.